Professor Silverman, so the Pilgrims and Native Americans have Thanksgiving in 1621. Did they have a second Thanksgiving together, let's say in 1622?
No,
No.
they most certainly did not.
Why not?
Well, the English actually sent an emissary to the Wampanoag leader, Usamiquin or Massasoit, and say to him, "You people have to stop showing up unannounced at our colony, because when you do, A, it frightens us, and B, we have to feed y'all, and we don't have enough to go around." So they give him.
I got to ask this question then, Professor Silverman. Was the first Thanksgiving? I think you alluded to this. Was that unannounced as well, or were they invited?
Oh, the English did not invite these folks to come. What happened was the Wampanoag oral tradition has helped to inform me on this point. The English are firing guns. They're engaged in celebratory gunfire. The hard work of the harvest is done. They're going to take a couple days off. There's some drinking involved. The men are outside going through military drills, target practice, and the like. Well, the Wampanoags have a defensive alliance with these folks. And among the threats that Plymouth Colony was guarding against was not only the threat of indigenous people in southern New England, the Narragansetts above all, but the French. Because the French knew that the English were engaged in this enterprise, and the French claimed this stretch of coast as their own. And so there was every reason to believe that a French vessel or fleet could sail into Plymouth Harbor and wipe the place out. So the Wampanoags hear this gunfire, and they show up in mass, armed, ready to help these people with whom they had formed an alliance.
I always thought they were invited to a feast.
No. The feast is already going on. They show.
Wow.
They contribute to the feast. They send out some of their men and haul back. I think it's three deer or something like that. But the problem of showing up unannounced to the English is a very real one. So they give the Wampanoag leader Massasoit, or Usamiquin, as his formal name was, a necklace, and they say, "Look, when you're sending someone to talk with us, have him put on this necklace, and we'll know that he came from you. Otherwise, tell your people to stop dropping by."
Okay, I guess that kind of makes sense.
Well, I'll tell you what, from a defensive purpose, it did make sense, because in the year 1622, the Powhatan Indians, in whose territory Jamestown was founded.
So we're going all the way down to Virginia now.
Right. They launch a surprise attack against the English in that year, in which they kill the English with their own tools. I mean, they make it look like they're just there for casual visits, as they were in the custom of doing, and then turned in an instant on these colonists. So the colonists of Plymouth know that if you have this pattern of casual interaction with your indigenous neighbors, you're opening yourself up for a surprise attack, and they most certainly did not want to do that.
So the colonists and the Wampanoag Native Americans are quote unquote friends. They're allies in 1621. At some point, they're no longer allies. What happens? And you say school teachers now say they vanished. Like, what happens?
Well, I think we should call them frenemies from the beginning.
Frenemies, okay.
Just to say, they have agreed to cooperate in matters of trade and military affairs, but they don't trust each other. Not much. And even from the beginning, there was a critical mass of Wampanoag people who thought that this decision by their leader, Usamiquin or Massasoit, to ally with these English was crazy. What they said was, we know what the behavior of these people has been over the course of several years. They've been raiding our coast, they've been enslaving our people, attacking us unprovoked. What do you think is going to happen with this place? And the answer is, he didn't know. Of course, he didn't know what was coming down the pike. All he knows is he's facing an emergency right now in the form of the Narragansetts, and these people can help him get through it. It's a short-term decision. In the short term, it was the right decision. The Wampanoags maintained their independence because, in part, they had the backing of the English, who came to their defense more than once in this ongoing intertribal war.
Sounds like a great story so far.
And it very quickly degenerates.
How quickly?
The reason, well, that is difficult to say. What I can say is this: we often call the period between, we, by which I mean the collective we. We say, well, 50 years of peace passed between the first Thanksgiving and then the Great War, King Philip's War, between the English colonists of New England and the Wampanoags and their indigenous neighbors. Well, that 50-year period of peace was marred by regular war scares between the two sides. There was the constant fear that war was about to break out, that one side was conspiring against the other, and both groups harbored this fear. And the reason they harbored this fear is that whereas Plymouth Colony was a nothing place, right? It starts with 50 people who can barely feed themselves. Half of them are women and children, right?
Some of them actually die in the first winter, right?
Half of them die. They go from 100 people on the Mayflower to 50 in the course of months.
Yeah.
They are no threat to Wampanoag sovereignty.
Okay.
But the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is founded in 1629, most certainly is. It begins with what we call the Great Migration. And that's the influx of upwards of 15,000 people in less than 10 years into the colony. Now, 15,000 people might not sound like a lot to
now, but it was a lot then.
It's the size of the greatest tribes. Very few of these tribes had more than 15,000 people. What's more, these English colonists reproduced like rabbits. The average English woman who came over on the Great Migration had 8 children over the course of her life. 8. And they're living. The children are living there. It's not like in the middle of London where half the kids are going to die before they reach a young age. On average, 6.5 of every 8 kids are living to adulthood, and not only living to adulthood, but reaching their 70s and 80s. So this is a recipe for a population explosion. What's more, these English colonists come with livestock, cattle, horses, sheep, pigs, which reproduced like livestock. And the English make no attempt to fence in these animals. They just let them range over the country. Well, where these animals are attracted is to Native American cornfields and clam banks, which hogs, most of your listeners probably don't realize, hogs dig up clams.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
They are an environmental shock force. And Native people very quickly find themselves being swarmed by colonists and their animals. What's more, the Wampanoag and more generally Native American expectation in this area and in almost all areas was that these guests would abide by the customs, the rules, the laws of their hosts. But that is not their intent. The English, like all Europeans of this era, saw themselves as Christian civilized people and Native people as savage pagans, and believed that by virtue of being civilized Christian people, they should lord it over the savage pagans and subject them to their laws and to their will, and to seize their territory if they had need for it. Well, Native people aren't going to concede to that. It's their country. And so the relationship starts to degenerate very, very quickly. And it's always just a question of when, not whether, there's going to be a major war.
And that happens with King Philip's War.
King Philip's War, which is named after the English name for Usamequin's or Massasoit's own son, Metacom, again known as King Philip. The second generation of these people in contacts are at war with one another. And, for that matter, Plymouth Colony is led by a guy, Josiah Winslow, whose father, Edward Winslow, had been one of the main points of contact between Plymouth Colony and the Wampanoags. He had doctored Wampanoag people. He had slept over their houses. He tried to speak their language. He knew them intimately and helped to create the conditions for which the alliance could flourish, under which the alliance could flourish. It's their very children who go to war with one another.
Dynamics change within a generation.
Within a generation. Yeah.
I have many just questions to ask about this history, but I want to shift to something else that has grabbed my attention over the years. And you call your first chapter in your book is Mourning in America. Mourning as in mourning the loss of something.
Yes, with a U.
With a U, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
And there is actually a day called Day of Mourning. Is it Thanksgiving Day or the day after it?
Native people led by Wampanoag activists hold a day of mourning protest on Thanksgiving.
So yeah, tell me about this.
In the town of Plymouth.
Oh boy.
In the town of Plymouth, on a hill beneath a statue of Massasoit and overlooking Plymouth Rock and a replica of the Mayflower. So the location is deeply symbolic.
Yeah.
And this began in 1970, and a Quina Wampanoag named Frank James had been asked by the state of Massachusetts to speak at the 350th anniversary of Plymouth's founding. And James he's a very well-educated guy. He had a degree from New England Conservatory of Music. He was a fine trumpet player. He taught music in the Nauset Regional Public Schools out on Cape Cod, and he studied history. He was an activist in Indian country, and so he wrote up what he thought was the appropriate talk for the 350th anniversary. And the state did not take too kindly to his native-centric view of it. And so when the state rejected his speech, he said, "To hell with it! I'll deliver it anyway on my own terms," and organized this day of mourning protest, which attracted Native people from throughout New England and even across the country. Members of the AIM movement, the American Indian movement, who were pushing red power, as they called it.
AIM, American Indian Movement. Okay.
That's right. They're probably best known for an armed standoff with the feds at Wounded Knee in the 1970s. They all showed up, and the tradition stuck. And various Native people have continued to hold a day of mourning at that place and time every year up to now.
Why have we not heard about this? I mean, you're a professor of history and this is your interest. I'm interested in history and I've read about this, but you almost never hear about this on TV, even on NPR. I don't think I've heard about this.
Native people are so marginalized in United States,
even to this day.
I think it's worse today.
Oh, you think it's worse today?
Yeah, I do in a lot of ways, and here's why I say, let's be clear about this and why it's so striking. There are more Native Americans than there are Jewish Americans. There are more Native Americans than there are Muslim Americans. There are
more Native Americans than there are Jewish Americans?
That is correct. And they control a larger portion of the country territorially than I think most non-Native people understand. And yet we have been taught, both directly and indirectly, and I think the subtle messages on this front are ubiquitous throughout our society, that Native people have disappeared, that they're extinct. And we're not taught, because we don't continue to follow Native America through history. They show up at the beginning, they might put up a brief resistance, and then they just go away.
Yeah.
We're not taught to see Native people as adapting through time and becoming fully modern members of society. So a Native person who has a short haircut and wears a suit and carries a briefcase, shops at the supermarket, drives a car, lives in a rectangular house, they're invisible to the broader American public.
But so is an Italian American or a Russian American, right?
Yes.
In that sense, in that specific sense that you were saying, has a short haircut, lives in a rectangular house, drives a car. I wouldn't know if they're Italian American or Russian American or, whatever, Syrian American.
Right. But if they told you they were, you would accept at face value that they were who they said they were. When Native people look like you or I, and they say to others, "Oh yeah, I'm Native American. I'm Wampanoag." People immediately start saying, "Well, do you live in a teepee? Right? Do you speak English? I'm amazed you speak English." They start quizzing them on their authenticity, and the standard for authenticity is whether they live as outsiders imagined they lived back at the moment of contact. And of course, none of us live like our ancestors did 400 years ago. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to survive in modern society. Well, the same goes for Native people. There is a fundamental difference between Native Americans and other ethnic groups in the United States, insofar as this. A, they were here first. They didn't choose to come here. They were already here. And B, they are sovereign nations. Jewish Americans aren't sovereign nations. Italian Americans are not sovereign nations. Indigenous people, if they're members of enrolled, federally recognized tribes or state tribes, are sovereign, which means that to be Native American isn't just to say, "Oh, I descend from so-and-so, or I perform these rituals." It means that you are a member of a political group that has sovereign rights within our society. Sovereign rights, by the way, which are guaranteed by Senate ratified treaties, which under the US Constitution are the supreme law of the land. And so that makes them fundamentally different than anyone else in American society.
Do you think the tradition of Day of Mourning has brought more attention to the plight of Native American, or is it something that's largely ignored? As I share with you, I can't think of anyone that within my circle that even has heard of this.
Right. Well, I think a number of people in New England have heard of it, and I've noticed in just the last couple of years, some major news organizations are starting to pick up on the story. The Washington Post just ran a feature this past week on this very point. But look, everyone loves Thanksgiving. Who wants to spend, this day? I mean, if we're going to mourn, it's going to be the behavior of our relatives after the day, after the holiday.
Who showed up unannounced, right?
That's right. Most people don't want to use the holiday to reflect on the crimes of the past.
Which goes back, give me a moment, let me read it. Which goes back that serious critical history tends to be hard on the living. They don't want to have that on Thanksgiving holiday, right? It's hard. It's hard to think of stuff like that.
That's right. That's right.
Let's take a break here. Stay with me and Professor Silverman as we get into the perspective.